Hundreds of human rights activists have met in Dublin, Ireland, to network and come up with ideas to strategize safely. The delegates came from around 100 countries, including South Africa, Brazil and Ivory Coast. They discussed the rights violations they face at the hands of some of the world's most repressive governments. To talk to us about this meeting and the work that they do is South Africa's very own Buhle Booi from Ndifuna Ukwazi. It's an activist organization and law center that advocates for access to well-located land and affordable housing for poor and working class families. Buhle, thank you so much for your time this evening. The work that your organization and other organizations such as yourself is often gone unnoticed and often a thankless task, fighting for those who cannot fight or speak for themselves. This must have been an extremely liberating and empowering experience, being in a room with 99 others whose passion for the work that they do is mirrored by yours.
No, thank you very much. I mean, it is indeed very exciting that we meet as frontline defenders, we meet as activists from across the globe to share experiences around human rights violation, and you come to learn that across the country people are facing similar struggles. People are fighting for urban land justice and other issues, but more so it's a recognition that even though these issues are different, we must take an approach of intersectionality and recognize that all forms of struggles are important, and that's what we came to this conference to do, to try to find ways and strategies that we could fight back as a united collective against these atrocities and human rights violation. And amongst the delegates here were United Nations and EU High Commissioners. All of them were here to witness and to hear people's stories around human rights violations, and we raised quite very important issues with them that are happening in our countries, and in particular in South Africa.
One only has to watch the news for one day, international news as well as local news. And it's not a stretch to say that the work that frontline human rights defenders are doing right now is almost more important, and there is more of it needed, more than any time before. What was the feeling that you got speaking to others at this get-together about how there seems to have been an increase in the work that you're doing, even though, for instance, in South Africa, we've been lauded internationally for this wonderful constitution that we have, and yet the work that your organization does is defending people whose rights are being pushed aside on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, it was very important that we got to interact with other frontline defenders from across the globe. And in as much as in South Africa we have a beautifully written constitution, but its implementation and significance on the ground is devoid of any substance to people that are suffering. A beautifully written constitution that has no meaning to people on the ground is another story. And what we are seeing is that this very same constitution, particularly in the context of South Africa, is being trampled upon. And what we've been seeing is that there's introduction of bylaws and municipal bills and amendment bills in Parliament that are being introduced even in the country to undo the work that was done in the constitution. For instance, the DA Amendment Bill on the Prevention of Illegal Evictions Act is one such a bill that tramples upon this constitution and the rights that are enshrined, particularly for those that have decided to occupy. That being criminalized, the DA wants to heighten punitive measures. And we are saying that that cannot be a correct response to people that have fallen in the cracks of this of this housing system. People will not live in pipeline projects. The state, instead of criminalizing people and wanting to introduce punitive measures, it should rather look at how it can provide housing for people. And one of the atrocities that we see in the country, and that we raised sharply with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on human rights, Mary Lola, is an issue of repression abahlali basemjondolo are being killed every day. Every other month, they are burying a member. And the South African government and South African police have done very little to resolve the cases of abahlali basemjondolo. And that cannot be accepted. And we've raised this with the United Nations to say that intervene here, and they've agreed that they will intervene indeed, and will write a letter to the South African government for such an intervention. So those are the issues that we came to raise here.
The example that you mentioned at the start of your answer speaks directly to work that your organization has been doing quite intensely, and I've seen the news reports coming out of Cape Town about it, where you've been standing up for especially those who live on the streets of Cape Town, who time and time again are having what few belongings that they have being taken away from them by local law enforcement officers who are hiding behind all kinds of bylaws. In you've taken them to court, and it's been a long process. And you've repeatedly said that this might be based, these bylaws might be based on the Constitution, like you've just mentioned, but it tramples on the human rights of these people. Do you think that because we have been so lauded for our constitutions, that sometimes, especially those at municipal level who work with bylaws in people's everyday lives, or in communities where people are more interested in ensuring that their property prices stay intact, that we have lost the word humanity in how we deal with our fellow South Africans?
If finding a homeless person over 1,000 rand for being homeless, if homelessness is being criminalized in South Africa, then that is that is a clear picture and indication that we've lost humanity as a country. The state has lost sympathy for people that are struggling. It is rather taking a position of further criminalizing people that are already in vulnerable situations. So those are the other issues that we've raised insofar as these bylaws that are being introduced with the United Nations. And we'll be raising these issues equally. We'll be writing a letter to Fiona, who's also one of the United Nations special rapporteurs, to intervene and check whether these bylaws that are being introduced are consistent with international laws and UN guidelines. Because what you see with these bylaws is that they're likened with counterterrorism laws and security laws that are being introduced in the African continent to repress voice of dissent. And with these bylaws that are being introduced, the state wants to punish people for fighting for their human rights. It wants to introduce punitive measures, and that cannot be allowed. It cannot be allowed. You must take a human approach to dealing with social issues. You cannot deal with societal issues with police. And one of the things that we've seen equally is that it's a bit of a police state, particularly in Cape Town, is that you see law enforcement officers or rather the security directorate being financed more than the human settlement department. The state that is supposed to be spending more money on social development and infrastructure, it's rather spending more money on policing. And that should paint a picture of trouble in our country, that there's a moral decay, that we want to deal with police or societal issues. So that cannot be correct. And those are the issues that we've been engaging with the United Nations and EU High Commissioners about in this conference that has lasted for 3 days.
Now, just in closing, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I was quite taken by a quote from one of your colleagues that was a participant at this get-together, the Frontline Defenders, from a Cressida Kuala, a women's rights defender and environmental activist from Papua New Guinea. And I think she attended the 2019 Dublin Platform as well. And I quote her here, and she says, "I have traveled thousands of miles over mountains, over seas, and over countries to get here to this gathering of frontline human rights defenders, to speak a secret violence that my people have lived through." And I thought that on a daily basis, we are seeing stories of South Africans, like you said, being ripped off the streets with the little belongings they have, of South Africans young children are risking their lives to cross over very dangerous rivers just to get to school, of South Africans who have no running water or access just to the dignity of a working toilet. Are we putting enough attention on these secret violences that our fellow South Africans are having to experience every single day?
I mean, we were not putting enough emphasis, and we have an uncaring state. The Premier of Western Cape lives in a free house with 3 basic services, but people of Khayelitsha in the informal settlements of Ndibane Bahlali and members of even Reclaim the City that have occupied in the inner city are still being deprived basic services to live. So the state doesn't take basic services issues and human rights issues quite very seriously. And that is why we met as activists here to see how we galvanize and uplift. One of the things that I think would need to come to terms with is that people are understanding that law alone can only take them so far. And people are tired on the streets, and they will respond, and they've found different ways. They've prefigured housing solutions, and that's what we've seen evident even through occupations in the countries. People prefiguring housing solutions in the absence of the state taking serious their cries and their human rights.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insight this evening. Buhle Booi from the activist organisation Ndifuna Ukwazi speaking to us live there from Dublin, where he's attended the frontline defenders at Dublin Castle, hosting more than 100 human rights defenders from around the world over the last few days. We thank him for his time this evening and hope he travels home safely.